I tried to walk away from Dreamchasers. I thought I could quit, leave it all behind, but Meek Mill told me something that still keeps me up at night. He said, "It's already too late." And in that moment, I realized there was no turning back.
I didn't know it then, but I was already in deeper than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't meant to share this, but here I am. Saying it out loud, because I can't keep it inside anymore.
This was back in 2018, right after Meek had gotten out of prison. You remember the headlines, don't you? The whole world was watching as he walked out, the crowds cheering, the cameras flashing, the outpouring of love from fans and celebrities alike. It felt like a victory for everyone, like we had all been holding our breath for him, hoping he'd finally be free. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph, right? But what I didn't know, and what no one told me, was that his release wasn't just about freedom. It wasn't just about the end of a sentence. There was something darker behind it. Something I couldn't have even begun to understand. I first got involved with Dreamchasers when a friend, someone who worked in the industry, invited me to an event. They called it a celebration for Meek's return. I thought it'd be a typical party. Maybe a little extravagant, a little too much champagne, but nothing I couldn't handle. I had no idea what I was walking into. I remember arriving at the venue. It was this sprawling mansion in the middle of nowhere. Not the kind of place I'd usually visit, but it was impressive to say the least. The kind of place you'd see in a music video. The driveway was long and winding, flanked by tall, dark trees that seemed to cast long shadows across the ground. There were guards posted at every corner, and even though the house was isolated, there were people everywhere. They were all walking with purpose, moving like they knew exactly where they were going, like they had a role to play, even if they weren't sure what that role was. When I walked up to the front door, I was greeted by a doorman, except there was something wrong with him. And I don't know how to explain it, but he looked off. His suit was immaculate, his posture perfect, but his face, there was something strange about it. He had no eyes. I swear. There were just these smooth, empty sockets where his eyes should have been. His face was expressionless too, but there was this unnerving calm in his gaze, or what should have been his gaze. He didn't speak a word, just motioned for me to enter. I was too stunned to ask what the hell was going on. And honestly, I think I was too intimidated to even question it. I just walked past him, my heart pounding. I didn't understand why it felt so unsettling, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made it feel like I was walking into something I wasn't supposed to. I wish I could say I walked in and everything was fine, that I was just another guest at the party, sipping champagne and laughing about the past. But that's not how it went. Not by a long shot. Inside the house, things weren't much better. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows on the walls. There were people milling about, but they weren't like the usual crowd you'd expect. There were no fans here, no photographers. The people I saw were different. They moved with purpose, like they knew exactly why they were there. Their eyes were cold, distant, and there was a quiet tension in the air. It wasn't what I thought a celebration would feel like. I found my way to the back of the house, where Meek was supposed to be. I had no real reason to go looking for him. It wasn't about that. But the atmosphere was so off, so thick with an unease I couldn't shake. that I found myself wandering deeper into the house, as if I had no choice.
And that's when I saw him. Meek Mill.
He was standing in a dimly lit room, his back to the door. He was surrounded by people, his entourage, I guess. But he wasn't talking to them. He was staring out the window, his face lost in thought. I watched him for a few moments before anyone noticed me standing there. When Meek turned around and saw me, his eyes locked onto mine. And for a second, I felt like the world stopped. I've never felt like that before. It wasn't like the usual celebrity gaze where they see you but don't really see you. No, this was different. His eyes were intense, almost like he could see straight through me. It was as if he knew exactly who I was, even though we'd never met. The weird part was it didn't feel like he was just looking at me. It felt like he was seeing something in me that I didn't even know existed. The room seemed to close in around us. The chatter faded into the background, and for a moment, it was just me and him. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like he knew something I didn't. A smile that said, "I've seen things you can't even begin to understand."
Come here, he said, his voice low and steady. But there was something in it. Something I couldn't place. I hesitated for a second, unsure of what was happening. But I walked toward him anyway. Come with me, he repeated, his gaze never leaving mine. I thought about walking away, turning back, but there was something in the way he said it, something in the way he was looking at me that made me follow him.
I didn't know it at the time, but that was the moment everything started to unravel. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. When Meek led me through the house, I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't nervous at first. The way he moved so effortlessly made everything seem normal, calm even, as if this was just another day, another room, another encounter. I told myself that maybe this was all part of the life I was finally a part of, the life I thought was glamorous. I followed him through the halls, the walls covered in dark, polished wood that gleamed under the soft overhead lights, giving the entire place a rich, elegant feel. There was an almost comforting air to the house, but there was something about it that didn't sit right. We passed through wide open rooms. One was a lounge area filled with sleek, modern furniture, with walls lined with vinyl records and framed photos of Meek's journey. Another room was smaller, with a round glass table at the center, and I remember thinking how comfortable it all seemed. It didn't feel like an event. It didn't feel like an infamous mansion. It felt like I was walking into a private space, something personal, something more intimate than I had imagined. Everything about the house seemed to lull me into a false sense of security. There was music playing faintly in the background, smooth and melodic, a contrast to the anxiety twisting in my stomach. I was a guest, but I didn't feel out of place. No one was watching me, no one was crowding me, no one was pushing me to do anything. It was just me and Meek, walking through this mansion like it was just another day, just another gathering. At first, I felt like I could breathe. There was nothing overtly unsettling about the place. The ceilings were high, the air cool, the furniture plush and inviting. There were velvet curtains framing the windows, their deep red fabric catching the light just right, casting warm shadows across the hardwood floors. The whole atmosphere gave off an impression of luxury, calm, and sophistication. It almost felt like I belonged here. like I could relax and just take it all in. I wanted to. I thought I could. Meek wasn't speaking much as we walked, his stride steady, purposeful. But there was a tension in the way he carried himself. It wasn't physical, but it was there. His shoulders were straight, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his jacket, but his gaze never wavered. His eyes darted from the hallway to the door ahead, not quite nervous, but alert. It was as if he was always waiting for something to happen. Something he knew was gonna happen, but didn't want to acknowledge yet. I could feel his energy shifting, even though he didn't show it outwardly. There was an undertone to his every step, like he was waiting for a signal, waiting for something that was out of his control. When we reached a closed door at the end of the hallway, he stopped. His hand hesitated on the handle for just a second, and I saw a brief flicker of something cross his face, something I couldn't read. Was it hesitation? Was it anticipation? I couldn't tell. But it was there. For the first time since we'd entered the house, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Something in the air had changed. The music, which had been soothing, now felt distant and hollow. The walls that had seemed comforting just moments ago now felt oppressive, like they were closing in on me, keeping me locked inside with no way out. Meek opened the door slowly, his body blocking most of the way. He stepped into the room, but I didn't follow immediately. I hesitated, looking at the dark wood paneling on the walls, the cold metallic door handle that gleamed under the soft light, and the strange feeling of not being able to breathe. The room was dim, lit by a single low-hanging chandelier that cast long shadows against the walls. The floors were covered with a thick, plush rug that muffled my footsteps as I finally entered behind him. The room was large, but not in the way you'd expect from a mansion. It felt almost claustrophobic, like the space was too small for the weight of everything happening inside it. The furniture was sparse. There was a single large leather chair by the window and a heavy wooden desk against the far wall. But it wasn't the furniture that made me uneasy. It was the absence of anything that gave it warmth, the lack of comfort. The air was different here, thicker. The temperature dropped by several degrees the moment I stepped inside. My breath came out in small clouds, even though it wasn't cold enough for that. I tried to shake off the unease crawling up my spine, but it wouldn't leave. Meek didn't move to sit down. He stood there by the desk, his back to me now, but he didn't speak. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, but nothing else. Not a sound. I couldn't even hear the music anymore. I looked around the room, trying to take in my surroundings, but the more I looked, the more I realized something was off. There were small details that didn't make sense, things that I couldn't explain. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but the books were old, dusty, and worn, yet they were organized meticulously, as if they had been untouched for years. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches. It was as if the room had been built just for show, but with nothing personal, nothing real to give it life. Then I noticed the window. It was huge, covering nearly an entire wall, but it wasn't a typical window. It was covered by thick, dark curtains, the kind that were meant to block out everything. No sunlight, no view, just darkness beyond the fabric. It was suffocating, like the room was trying to trap me in this strange, empty void, leaving me no choice but to sit in the silence and wait. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to sit or stand, but Meek didn't make a move to gesture toward the chair. Instead, he walked over to the desk, his footsteps making no sound on the thick rug. He placed his hand flat on the surface like he was steadying himself. His eyes were focused ahead, as though he was waiting for something to happen. But his body was tense, his shoulders drawn tight, his jaw clenched. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach churn. There, on the desk, was an open envelope. The paper inside was old, yellowed, and covered in strange symbols. Symbols I couldn't read. I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. It was like they were drawing me in, pulling my gaze to them with a force I couldn't explain. I was terrified, yet somehow compelled to look at it, to see what it meant, what it had to do with me. My hand twitched at my side, but before I could take another step forward, I heard a voice. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you," Meek said, his voice low and steady. His eyes never left the desk. His warning wasn't just for my safety, it was a command, a warning to stay away. But something in me wanted to move closer. Something in me wanted to understand why the room felt like this. Why Meek was acting this way, why I felt like I had been walking into a trap I couldn't see. "Don't," he repeated, his tone more forceful this time. I hesitated. The air around me felt thick. Something in the room had changed, and I knew it wasn't just me. It was something else. And that's when I realized I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was part of something far darker than I could have imagined. It didn't take long for the unease to settle in. Slowly, quietly, but deeply, like a weight pressing against my chest. I kept trying to ignore it, telling myself it was all in my head, that I was just overthinking everything, that I should relax. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was as if something was off. Something was wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I couldn't keep my eyes off that room, the one with the strange symbols on the desk. It had started to haunt me. The symbols, the thick curtains, the way Meek kept glancing at it like it was holding some dark secret. Every time I looked at that locked door across the room, I felt an undeniable pull, as if it was silently calling me, telling me I had to know what was behind it. But the way Meek avoided the subject, the way the whole atmosphere around the room shifted every time someone mentioned it, it made me want to back away, to pretend it wasn't there. But I couldn't. I looked around the room, trying to distract myself, but it wasn't working. The air seemed thick, oppressive, like the walls were inching closer and closer with every breath I took. The music, which had been playing faintly when I first entered, had stopped completely. The silence was unbearable. The sound of my own heartbeat was the only thing I could hear. And that's when I noticed the guest in the corner of the room. I hadn't seen him before, and I couldn't place him. His face seemed unfamiliar, but his eyes stayed on me longer than they should have. I don't mean a casual glance or a friendly look. No, this was different. His eyes were locked on me, as if he was studying me, watching me. I tried to look away, to pretend I hadn't noticed, but it was like he was daring me to react. It was subtle at first, just a lingering look. But the longer I stared at him, the more uncomfortable I became. His expression didn't change. There was no warmth, no acknowledgement that we were even in the same room. It was like he was looking at me, but not really seeing me, like I was something to be scrutinized, examined.
I felt my skin prickle, but I didn't break eye contact. I couldn't.
Something about the way he stood, his posture rigid, too still, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He was tall, wearing a black suit, but there was nothing that screamed important about him. It wasn't his appearance that was unsettling. It was the way he carried himself, like he was watching everything from the shadows, calculating every move, every breath. I tried to focus on something else. I turned back to Meek, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was talking to someone, his back to me. I couldn't tell who it was, just a figure standing by the window. But Meek's conversation wasn't what caught my attention. It was the sound, the soft scraping noise that started to fill the room. It was barely audible, but it was there. Low, like a dragging sound, faint but persistent. I glanced around, trying to find the source of it. But everything seemed normal. The air still felt too thick, but there was nothing visibly out of place. The noise didn't stop. It seemed to get louder, closer, but it wasn't coming from anywhere. It wasn't coming from the guests or the staff. It was coming from somewhere in the house. And that's when the door at the far end of the room caught my eye again. The locked door.
I couldn't stop myself this time. My curiosity outweighed everything else. I walked toward it, just a few steps, drawn to it in the same way I'd been drawn to that strange desk earlier. The closer I got, the more intense the dragging sound became. I didn't know what it was, but the sound was there, relentless, echoing in my mind like a warning. As I neared the door, I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't be here." It was the man in black, the one I had seen earlier. His tone was calm, almost too calm, but there was something in the way he said it that stopped me in my tracks. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The air seemed to freeze for a moment, the temperature dropping just enough for me to feel it in my bones.
I turned around to face him, but his eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on the door. He was watching it, his posture stiff, as if he was preparing for something. I couldn't explain it, but the way he stood there, so rigid, like he was bracing for something, it made me feel like I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding. Like I had walked into a trap I couldn't see. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what was happening. But the tension in the room had shifted again. Heavier this time, thicker, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The man in black looked at me finally, his eyes narrowing as if he had been reading my thoughts. "Don't touch the door," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "It's not meant for you." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to ask him what the hell he was talking about. What was behind that door? What was happening in this house? But his warning was enough to make me take a step back. I wasn't sure if it was the door itself or the weight of his words, but something in me told me not to press further. I didn't belong here. The sound stopped suddenly. The dragging, the scraping noise, it just vanished, leaving an eerie, suffocating silence in its wake. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was pounding in my chest, the beat heavy and fast. I couldn't tell if it was from fear or just the tension that had been building inside me. I turned back to Meek. He was still talking to the person at the window, but this time, his back was turned toward me. and I noticed something different in his posture. It wasn't just that he was casually engaged in conversation, it was that he wasn't looking at me at all. He didn't acknowledge my presence.
It was like I wasn't even there.
I started to feel something worse than the discomfort I'd been feeling before. This wasn't just a party or a celebration. This wasn't just me being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wasn't supposed to be here. And whatever was happening, whatever I had walked into, was too big, too dangerous for me to understand. The whole atmosphere had shifted. The music had stopped. The people had stopped talking. The shadows in the room had grown longer, the air thicker, like it was holding something down, keeping it in place. And I felt it, the unmistakable sensation that I wasn't alone in that room. The eyes I had noticed earlier, the ones that had been watching me, were still there. I could feel them even though no one was looking at me anymore.
But that was just the beginning.
I'd felt it before, the pressure in the air, the tension that weighed down on my chest like 1,000 invisible hands pushing against me. But this time, it was different. It was sharper, colder. The room wasn't just oppressive anymore. It was suffocating, and I could feel it deep inside me that something had changed. Something was wrong. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself that maybe I was overthinking things, that maybe I had simply stepped into something that was bigger than I could comprehend. But as I looked around the room, the quiet suffocating me from all sides, I realized I was no longer just a spectator. I was no longer just an innocent bystander in this surreal world. I was a part of it now, and the feeling settled into my bones like an ominous shadow. The room had grown unnervingly quiet. I hadn't noticed it at first, but it was there now. The absence of sound, the faint murmurs, the distant music, the soft clinking of glasses. Everything had stopped. The stillness was overwhelming, suffocating. It was like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The guests who had been mingling before had all grown eerily still. Some of them were standing, frozen in place, their eyes vacant, their expressions unreadable. I could see it now, the subtle tension in their faces, the tightness in their jaws. There was something unnatural about the way they stood, as if they were all waiting for something, some signal. But what? Meek, too, had changed. He wasn't the same person I had followed into the house. The energy around him had shifted, and now, as he stood by the window, his back to me, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Something deeper. Something that went beyond the music, beyond the success. It wasn't about his freedom anymore. It was about something else entirely. Something darker. I tried to move, tried to make sense of the chaos that was swirling in my mind, but my legs felt like lead. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, heavy, suffocating. It was like I was trapped inside this house, and the walls were closing in on me with every passing second. I turned toward the door again, the locked one, the one that had been taunting me from across the room, the one I couldn't stop staring at. I knew something was behind it, something I wasn't supposed to see. But what was it? I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest, my palms slick with sweat. The closer I got to the door, the more I could feel it, the pull, the magnetic force that drew me toward it. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew I wasn't supposed to know what was behind it, but something in me couldn't stop. Something told me that I had to. I reached for the handle, and as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, something happened. The air shifted. The temperature dropped. The world around me freezing. And for a brief moment, I couldn't hear anything. Not the music, not the silence, not even my own breath. Everything went still. Everything went silent.
Then came the real shock. The door. It opened on its own.
I swear to you, I didn't touch it. I didn't push it. It just creaked, slowly, as though it was being pulled open from the other side. The darkness that spilled out from the gap was unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was something unnatural. It felt like it was pulling me in, like it wanted me to step into it. For a moment, I froze. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest, my body frozen in place, my legs too weak to take another step forward. But the pull was too strong. Something in that darkness called to me, deeper than fear, deeper than reason. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was like a force of nature, something outside of my control. I had to see what was inside. I had to. I stepped forward cautiously at first, but the closer I got to the door, the faster my feet moved, like I was no longer in control of my own body. I could feel the weight of the room behind me, pressing down on me, urging me forward. The door opened wider, the darkness spilling out, consuming the light in the hallway, swallowing everything in its path. As I crossed the threshold, the air turned colder. It wasn't just cold, it was freezing. I could see my breath rising in small clouds in front of me. The room beyond the door was so dark I couldn't see a thing. But it wasn't just the absence of light. It was more than that. It felt wrong. I reached out, my hand trembling, but I couldn't see anything to guide me. My fingertips brushed against the walls and I recoiled instantly. The walls were wet, slick and cold, as if something had been dripping down them for years. The sensation sent a jolt of panic through me, my heart racing faster than ever before. I took another step, and that's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the room. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't even a noise. It was something primal, something old. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back. My eyes frantically searching for something, anything that could explain the feeling creeping up my spine. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to run, to get out of that room. But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't obey. The darkness was too thick, too suffocating, and the sound was getting louder, clearer. It was like it was calling to me, pulling me into the shadows. Then I felt it. A cold hand brushed against my arm, sending a shock of ice through my body. I spun around, but there was no one there. Nothing but darkness. But I knew. I knew something was with me. Something that wasn't human. Something that had been waiting in the dark, waiting for me to step into its grasp.
And that's when everything changed.
The door slammed shut behind me. I gasped. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to move, but the air was thick, heavier now, like it was closing in on me, choking the life out of me. I pressed against the door, but it wouldn't open. It was locked, sealed shut, and I was trapped. I pounded against it, my fists slamming into the cold wood, but nothing happened. The room was silent again, too silent. The weight of the darkness pressed in, and I could feel it, wrapping itself around me, suffocating me, pulling me deeper into its grip.
I was never meant to be here. I was never meant to see this. But now I was. And there was no way out.
And that's when I knew I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The moment I stepped into that room, something inside me snapped. It wasn't the cold air or the suffocating darkness that made my skin crawl. It was the feeling that something in this house, in this world, had shifted. The door behind me slammed shut with a heavy final thud. I don't know why, but I knew I wasn't going to escape. Not now. Not ever. My heart was pounding in my chest. My breath shallow as I stared into the impenetrable blackness ahead of me. I felt it before I saw it. The weight. The presence. It wasn't just in the room. It was in my mind, in the space between my thoughts. I could feel it pressing in on me, wrapping around me like a vice. I had never been this terrified in my life. It wasn't the kind of fear that made you want to scream and run. It was the kind of fear that paralyzed you. The kind that made you question whether you were even alive, whether you were still in control of your own body.
The walls seemed to close in. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light, it felt alive. It moved, shifted, like it had a purpose, like it knew something I didn't. Every breath I took felt heavier. My legs were shaking. I could barely stand. The floor felt unsteady beneath me, like I was on the edge of a cliff, just one wrong step away from falling into something I didn't understand. I turned, hoping to find the door again. I reached for it, my hand trembling as it brushed against the cold wood. But there was nothing there, just a blank wall, solid and unyielding. The door was gone. I looked around, the panic rising in my chest. What was happening? Where was everyone? Why was I alone in this suffocating void?
The shadows seemed to gather around me, curling in the corners of the room, whispering, no, hissing, in languages I couldn't understand. The noise wasn't loud, but it was constant, like a chorus of voices all speaking at once, their words overlapping, creating a low rhythmic hum that drilled into my skull.
Help, I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips, but there was no response. No one. No sound except the hollow hum in the distance. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. My mind was racing, heart pounding, and I had to focus. I had to think. But the longer I stayed in that place, the harder it became to think. The shadows seemed to press closer, and I could feel them reaching for me, clawing at my skin. I was suffocating. I was being pulled into something.
Then something caught my eye. A faint light, flickering in the distance like a small flame in the dark. It was so subtle at first that I thought I had imagined it. But then it grew brighter, moving toward me, slow and steady. My first instinct was to run, to get away from whatever it was, but my feet wouldn't move. My body refused to obey me. The light grew larger, revealing a shape in the center of the room. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything human. I don't know how to describe it. How could I? It didn't make sense. It was like a shadow, but not a shadow. Like a thing that had no right being here. Its form twisted and writhed, constantly shifting, never staying still. Its edges were sharp, jagged, like it was cutting through the very fabric of reality. But its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, were the worst part. They glowed red, fiery, too bright for something that was supposed to be in the shadows. They weren't like normal eyes. They were empty, hollow, as if the thing behind them had no soul, no humanity left.
I froze,
unable to move, my heart pounding in my ears. It was staring at me, watching me, its gaze so intense that it felt like it was burning through my chest. I couldn't look away. I couldn't even breathe. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My body was locked in place, paralyzed by the sheer presence of it. My mind was screaming at me to run, to do something, but I was frozen, trapped in this nightmare I had unwittingly stepped into. And then it spoke. Not with words, no, not like that. It was more like a voice that echoed inside my head, inside my very being, so loud it felt like it was shaking my bones. You should have never come here. I wanted to close my eyes, to block out the voice, to block out the sight of it, but I couldn't. It wasn't just the words that terrified me, it was the truth behind them. The undeniable knowledge that whatever was in that room knew me, knew my thoughts, knew my fears. Please, I begged, the word slipping out of me, weak and broken. I just want to leave. I don't want this. It didn't answer. It didn't need to. The air grew colder, and the shadows around me seemed to reach toward me, clawing at my skin, at my very soul. I could feel the pressure of it, pushing against me, forcing me to kneel, to collapse, to give in. The weight of it was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I could feel it in my chest, that crushing pressure, like the world was pressing down on me from all sides. The shadows were no longer just around me, they were inside me. I could feel them crawling, twisting in my veins, in my heart, like they were taking control. I tried to fight it, but I was too weak. I couldn't fight whatever was happening. It had already started. Then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. The darkness, the cold, the oppressive weight, it vanished, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I blinked, disoriented, my head spinning. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought I had made it out. But when I opened my eyes, I was no longer alone. Meek was standing in front of me. His face was different. There was no warmth in his eyes, no sign of recognition. It was like he was a stranger, someone I had never met. The man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by something cold, something monstrous. You tried to leave, didn't you? He asked, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. There was no anger, no disappointment, just a cold, empty tone, like he had expected this. I opened my mouth to speak, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but no words came out. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, like someone was squeezing the life out of me. I tried to move, but my body refused to cooperate. I was trapped. Meek stepped closer, and I could see the shadows swirling around him, twisting and turning like they were part of him, feeding off his presence. You should have known, he said, his voice growing colder. Once you step into this world, there's no getting out, no matter how hard you try. And that's when everything changed. Everything happened so quickly. One moment, I was staring into the cold, empty eyes of Meek. The next, the room was spinning, my legs giving out beneath me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me, like I had fallen into some kind of trap I never saw coming. I don't even know how long I was on the floor. My knees hit the cold, hard surface with a jolt, but the pain barely registered. All I could feel was the overwhelming sense of dread, the suffocating pressure in my chest. My body was shaking, my breath shallow and erratic. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't just scared. I was terrified. The room had gone silent again, but this time it felt even more suffocating. There was no hum, no distant voices, no sounds from the house outside. It was just the heavy stillness pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. My heart was pounding in my chest, so loud in my ears that I thought it would drown out everything else. I tried to move, tried to push myself up, but I couldn't. My body refused to listen. The air felt thick, and every breath I took felt like I was inhaling pure smoke. I wasn't sure what was happening to me. My vision blurred as I tried to focus on something, anything, but everything seemed to be shifting, spinning. The walls were closing in, the shadows growing longer, twisting around me, until it felt like I was caught in the center of something much larger than I was. Meek hadn't moved. He hadn't said anything else, but I could feel him watching me. His eyes were cold, empty. I couldn't read them. There was no emotion there, just a blankness that chilled me to my core. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape from whatever was happening to me, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt like I was stuck in place, suffocating under the weight of this place, under the weight of what Meek had just said to me. But then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the silence. I looked up, and that's when I saw him, the man in black, the one who had been standing at the door earlier. He was walking toward me now, his pace unhurried, his eyes locked on me, his face unreadable. I tried to speak, tried to force words out, but nothing came. I couldn't form the sentences. My mouth was dry, my body too numb. The man in black didn't say anything as he stepped closer, his presence filling the room. It was like the air around him shifted, becoming heavier with each step he took. He stopped just a few feet away from me, and I could feel the temperature drop even further, like the room was freezing. "You shouldn't have come here," he said finally, his voice cold and devoid of any empathy. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was just a statement, like a fact he had already accepted. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The fear that had been coiling in my chest was now tightening, strangling me from the inside. I wanted to get up. I wanted to run, to do anything but stay there. But my body betrayed me. The man in black knelt down in front of me, his dark eyes boring into mine. "You knew what you were getting into. You saw the signs. But now," he trailed off, his gaze flickering toward the door, toward the dark room where Meek had led me earlier. The place where everything had started to unravel. I turned my head, following his gaze. The door was still there, but now it seemed farther away, distant. The shadows in the room were growing, stretching toward the door like fingers, pulling me back, pulling me into whatever nightmare was waiting for me on the other side. I opened my mouth to speak again, but this time, the words came out in a whisper. "What's going on? What is this place?" The man in black didn't answer right away. He just stood up, taking a step back, as if he was giving me space to process what was happening. "It's too late for questions," he said, his tone flat. "You've crossed the line." I felt a chill run through me at his words. I wanted to scream, to ask him what he meant, but I couldn't. I was stuck, caught in the web of whatever this was, unable to move, unable to break free. I tried to get up again, my legs still shaking, but this time, I made it to my feet. I stood there for a moment, swaying, the world around me still spinning. I had to get out of there. I had to leave. I couldn't stay. I couldn't. But as I took a step toward the door, something held me back. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like something invisible. Something pressing against my chest, like an invisible hand gripping me and forcing me to stay in place. I glanced back at Meek. His eyes were still on me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something flicker in his expression. It wasn't the emptiness I had seen before. It wasn't cold. There was something else, something darker, something full of regret. But even in that brief moment, it wasn't enough to make me feel better. It didn't make me feel safe. "You can't leave," Meek finally said, his voice low. It was more of a fact than a statement, but it shook me to my core. Once you're in, there's no way out. You can't run from this. I turned away from him, shaking my head, my heart racing. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I can't. I trailed off, my words lost in the air. I didn't know what I was saying anymore. All I knew was that I was in too deep, and there was no way to escape. The man in black took a step forward, blocking my path. His eyes never left mine. "You should have never come here," he repeated, his voice colder than before. "Now you'll have to face the consequences." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew the fear I had felt earlier was nothing compared to what was coming. I could feel the darkness growing, pulling me in deeper, swallowing everything around me. I was trapped. There was no way out. The shadows in the room seemed to bend toward me, and for a second, it felt like the walls were moving, closing in on me, pushing me toward the door I couldn't reach. I tried to scream, but the sound didn't leave my throat. My mouth opened, but no words came out. It was like I was drowning in a nightmare, suffocating under the weight of it all. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door opened, but it wasn't the door I had been trying to reach. It was the door behind me, the one I hadn't noticed before, the one that hadn't been there just moments ago. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I thought walking away would be enough. I thought leaving would set me free. But now every time I close my eyes, I see that door. I hear the whispers. I feel the darkness creeping closer. If you ever hear my name again, just know it's already too late for me. Whatever I found behind that door, it's not done with me yet.